Today we are going to be talking about neurotransmission. So I wanted to first talk to you about the parts of the neurons. So this is a pretty good picture. It shows you the main parts of the neurons. The dendrites are the branches, and this part receives the information from the terminal button of the other neurons. And then going in to the cell body is the nucleus, and just like every other cell in your body, the nucleus contains the genetic material of the neuron. And then the stoma is what is surrounding the nucleus or houses the nucleus. And then off of your stoma is the axon, and this conveys the information from the stoma to the terminal button. And going from the axon, you have myelin sheaths that surrounds the axon, and it helps insulate it, and it prevents the messages from spreading between adjacent axons. And where you see the little splits where the myelin sheath is, that's called the noda rivara, and this is the bare part of the myelinated axon. And in the myelinated axon, there are Swanson cells, and these are in the parietal nervous system, and it's again wrapped around a myelinated axon, and this provides one segment of the myelinated sheath. And then at the end of your neuron, you have your axon terminal or your terminal buttons, and this is at the end of the branch neuron, and this forms synapses with the other neurons, and it sends information to that neuron. So now we're going to touch on kind of how the action potential happens. So sodium-potassium pump is a big part of it. So once the threshold is reached, the sodium channels open and sodium rushes in, and this begins the action potential. Once action potential reaches its maximum amount, this causes the sodium channels to clog, and it totally stops the sodium from coming in. And when this happens, this causes the voltage-dependent potassium channels to open and allow potassium in. And this picture just shows you the flow of them. So the next slide, I'm just going to touch on the graph because this is a pretty good graph. So where you see the negative 70 millivolts, that is your resting value or your resting potential. And then, so this, once the sodium comes in, it will open the sodium channels, and then more sodium flows, the sodium channels close, and then your potassium channels open, and then once those begin to close, you see that drastic drop in your millivolts, and then so it goes a little past the resting potential, and then it evens back out. And then I want to touch on the synapse. So the synapse has a couple parts to it. The presynaptic membrane, which is located at the end of the terminal button, and that lies adjacent to the postsynaptic membrane, and it releases the neurotransmitters. So the postsynaptic membrane is at the end of the terminal button, and this receives the messages. You also have synapses vessels, which are found in your terminal buttons, and this contains molecules of neurotransmitters. And then you also have receptor sites, and this is the place where the neurotransmitters bind. So in the picture, they're clearly labeled for you what parts they are. So you can always just go back. It makes a little bit more sense when you look at the picture and then you read the slide. So the release of neurotransmitter happens when the action potential is moving down the neuron, and the synaptic vessels located in the presynaptic membrane fuse together and break open, releasing into the synaptic cleft. The synaptic cleft is the little opening part in the picture. And then your receptors get activated. And this happens when diffusion across the synaptic cleft causes binding to the postsynaptic receptors. And then the neurotransmitter dependent ion channels are open. And these are just like your sodium and potassium channels. It can only allow the certain one ion to come in and to come out. If it's not the correct one, it will not flow through that channel. And these channels help remove and add ions to the membrane. The removal of neurotransmitters happens by reuptake. And it all happens in the synapse as well. So that is why this picture is here. And that is just a little bit about neurotransmission. Thank you, and here are my references.